afternoon, and welcome to Community Day Questions with the Council. We've asked our participating organizations and other stakeholders to share their top questions with us. And so today, in the brief time that we have, we will attempt to answer some of the most frequently asked ones. So it's been 3 years since we've all been together in Europe for a community meeting. And so let's talk a little bit about what has changed at the PCI Security Standards Council. And Lance, let's start with you.
Wow, that's a long list. But I think probably what we learned is how to not lose contact with all of you. Obviously, when the world shut down with COVID, the tools that we use to talk to you, to learn from you, the in-person meetings, the trainings, which were all done in person, they didn't work anymore. So we had to figure out how to change, how to shift direction and do things more remotely. So obviously, hybrid meetings are now part of what we do, but that started with us being fully remote, learning how to do things on Teams, on WebEx, doing more of the meetings that we would typically have in a room remotely. And it was really challenging at first, though we were able to learn from all of our stakeholders how they've done it and share information, which is how the community works, and learn how to actually do that better. Separately, probably the single biggest challenge was in the trainings. We were heavily invested in face-to-face trainings, and we had to learn to pivot and put things into a higher proportion of CBT and a new component which has become extremely valuable, which is instructor-led remote trainings. So those are the types of tools which really defined the changes from the council that are new for us and will continue on going forward because they have been extremely valuable.
And Emma, what about you?
Well, I think in addition to everything that Lance just covered, the other area that really we had to adapt to was adapting to what the impact was on you, the stakeholders. For example, how assessments were being performed, and the shift from being able to easily have an assessor come on site and look at something to having to manage that whole process remotely. So things like providing guidance and getting the assessor input on how they were managing remote assessments in order to produce that guidance was one big area of focus that we had. Similarly, for our vendors and solution providers who have products listed on our website, there were challenges for those organizations to have the assessment to get those products revalidated when their expiry time or their validation time was up. So we introduced some program allowances and extensions to allow for the fact that these products were still considered validated, but they hadn't been able to meet all of their criteria for revalidation, for example. So we wanted to make sure we could still support those validations while making it still maintaining the security level of assurance that we had. So looking at different ways of doing that as well. I think that were two of the big ones that I remember. Yeah.
Well, as many of you heard in Lance's opening remarks today, the Council is restructuring its existing participating organization program. So we brought Lance back on stage to help clarify some of the information that was presented. So Lance, under this new program, there are different levels, and you mentioned that the associate PO is comparable to our existing PO program. So why should organizations consider joining as a principal PO?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's one that actually I get to turn back onto the community itself, because the principal PO grew out of requests to be more involved, to be more active, to be a bigger part of making the council a success, driving the changes that the council needed to be considerate of going into the future. Historically, a lot of the information that we put forward and is then commented by the community is then turned around and comes back out. But now what we've done is we are looking to the principal PO as being the initiator of some of that work. What do we need to be considering? How do we need to be considering it? What are those concerns that are driving business issues for the industry? What are those new options that they're considering as far as changing their business models? And as they're exploring those and looking at them, bringing that to us and guiding us, you. So this is really an opportunity based on the request that many organizations have made of why can't you have more insight into the process by which we define our future direction together, our collective objectives together. So that's really what the Principal PO is designed to do. Bring you into the conversation, not in reviewing what we do, but also setting that agenda going into the future. And that's why someone or an organization would be really interested in being part of this.
So how does that change the Board of Advisors?
So there are a couple of items around the Board of Advisors. Board of Advisors is the foundation of the strategic activities of the company. That's not going to change. If anything, in many respects, it's going to become more important, because if you look at historically, the Board of Advisors has represented key domains, merchants and processors, and by geography. If you look over the last 16 years, the environment, the industry has expanded dramatically. There are new players, there are new areas that people are working in. What we call payments today isn't necessarily the same definition of what we were calling it 16 or 18 years ago. So one of the things that was really clear we needed to do was bring in those new perspectives, get more people around the table, get a broadening of the voices around the table so that the input and the dialogue and the debate was really relevant to the entire industry. So we've gone from a group of approximately 30 seats to now 56 seats. 24 of those are going to be for the Principal PO, and what we previously would have had is 30 organizations. Now we're going to have 32 from the associate PO groups, and that's to make sure that these voices do represent a broadening. Additionally, and this is probably the single most important aspect, and it's probably one of the more transformative for the council, we're going to be putting decisions back onto the Board of Advisors. Yes, they're a Board of Advisors, but they're going to be making the vote and doing a vote to actually approve those major work items that historically they would have a lot of say in. You all would have a lot of say in, but now they're going to be the ones approving it.
And that brings up another point about how this restructure, how this change impacts the development of standards, which you just touched on a little bit, but can you expand on that?
Well, one of the things that has always been important is that we get a lot of engagement around the specifics of the standard. Now what we're hoping is with the Principal POs that there'll be a generation of some of the future objectives of where we're going. And then with the Board of Advisors, it's not just during the RFC process, but after all of that input is brought in and collated and worked through on the standard, it'll be back to that organization to say, yes, this is what it was intended to be. This is what we expected it to be, and they'll be approving it. Now, the consequence of that is it's going to take a little longer for some of the standards to be developed and to be issued, because we want to get it right, which means we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to read it, understand it, and vote on it, which puts a bigger burden on us to make sure that everyone who is part of that process truly understands what they're voting on.
So everyone in the room is a participating organization, but if they wanted to upgrade to Principal PO, how would they go about doing that?
Well, the current process is in place through the end of the year, and then this new design will be effective with the beginning of the next year. An existing organization that doesn't want to make any changes doesn't have to do anything. All of the rights, all of the opportunities are still going to be there, plus there'll be some additional ones. But as of the beginning of the year, if an organization does want to take that fairly significant step forward and be part of the Principal PO, they can go ahead and sign up as of January 2nd. January 2nd, and with January 2nd, then they would be entered in as a principal PO, and we are going to be seating the new Board of Advisors on June 1st of next year, which would be the expanded Board of Advisors, which includes several of them.
Okay, so we've also received numerous questions related to PCI DSS version 4.0, and I wanted to note that we do have dedicated sessions available tomorrow and Thursday on this topic, so you'll get a much more in-depth presentation, including Emma's presentation on embracing the journey to PCI DSS version 4, which is on Thursday. And so while we have you here, Emma, let's take a moment today to answer some of the most frequently asked questions that we've received lately. We'll start with one big question, which is, what's the difference between compensating controls and the customized approach?
So we're starting with the easy questions. Thank you. I appreciate that. That's definitely a very complex question and answer. Before I give you the highlight summary view of the answer, I will just expand a little on what you were saying about the upcoming presentations we have this week. We have 2 presentations tomorrow that will delve into what's new in PCI-DSS version 4 a lot more, and also touch on sort of the 10 biggest key questions that we've had since it's been released. And then on Thursday, we have 3 presentations on PCI-DSS version 4. The one Alicia mentioned that I'll be walking through things to keep in mind as you're looking to transition from the current version 3.2.1 to version 4. We'll also be having a deeper dive into the reporting changes that are happening with version 4. And also there will be a panel on that morning of the PCI team that helped develop the standard, along with the assessor quality team and our training team, to actually dive deeper into the customized approach. So there's a lot more information to come on that subject, much more than I could cover in a couple of minutes here. But just on that point about compensating controls and customized approach, customized approaches, if you're not aware of it, hopefully you are, is a new option that's provided in version 4, which provides a different method or different means for organizations to validate that they have met the security objectives that a PCI-DSS requirement is intended to meet. Now, if you're currently using compensating controls in order to meet a PCI-DSS requirement, you can still continue to do that. The defined requirements, as we call them, the currently written, stated requirements and test procedures in the standard, they're also still there in version 4. They're still completely available as the way to validate if that's the way that works for you. And compensating controls are still provided as an option there. If you're using customized approach, that's really intended for organizations who are meeting security objectives in different ways. Perhaps you're sort of using cutting-edge new types of technology, or you've implemented your own sort of innovative approach to how you're meeting security. So you won't be meeting security objectives in the same way the standard has in those requirements, but you have the sort of risk management and the documentation and testing behind what you've implemented, so that you can, show how your implementation meets that objective in a different way. So yeah, compensating controls are still there. They're there to support the defined approach, and then customized approach is another new option for you as well.
So on a related note, we received a question: who decides whether an entity should implement a customized approach?
Well, that decision is ultimately up to the organization themselves. And the organization is the only entity who can make that decision, because it's the organization who knows what security controls they have in place, what their company's security strategy is, and therefore which of the 2 approaches would be the right one, for that organization to follow. And I do want to note that it's not a case of needing to choose one in its all entirety or another one in its entirety. You can certainly follow the defined approach for some requirements, and then the customized approach for other requirements. If you have one area potentially of your security controls that are meeting security in a different way, that might only be a couple of requirements that you're meeting through that control, and then you're meeting the other PCI-DSS requirements through the defined approach as it's stated. So there are 2 approaches. The defined approach, as I said, is the approach that's always been in the standard. So if you're familiar with that, if you're comfortable doing things that way, you can continue to do that absolutely without having to change anything. For organizations that are new to PCI-DSS, that's possibly also a good option for those organizations, because it really points out the path to follow in order to meet the requirement, and it provides upfront the type of testing that will need to be done to verify that. So having that information mapped out for you, I think, can be very helpful for some organizations. But for other organisations that I said that are potentially doing things in different ways, using new ways of meeting security, or they have some innovation or some cutting edge products that they're looking at, that might be where the customised approach supports those organisations. And for those organisations, it's very important that they do have a mature security implementation, mature security strategy, and that's supported by a risk management aspect, because it's really about knowing how to verify that the objective is met and how much the risk has been addressed. So, two different approaches which hopefully support most organisations' needs.
Can compensating controls and the customized approach be used for the same requirement?
Yes, they can. Yes, which again, it can be complex because we have all these options available for you now. But an organisation that is using a compensating control can continue to use that, as I said. It's possible to use both the defined approach and the customised approach within one requirement. You might have, I'll just use an example, one of the more technical requirements is to have an anti-malware solution that protects against malware. And you might have different types of system technologies in place. And some platforms you might follow the defined approach and follow the requirements to protect those systems from malware. But you might also have other systems that use a different approach to protect from malware, and the different approach might be more of a customized approach, innovative way of doing it. So you could be meeting that same requirement in two different ways on different types of systems or in different locations. If you have different locations that are covered by that requirement, then again, one location might be doing it one way, another might be doing it the other way. So because you can have both the defined approach and the customized approach in one requirement, you could still also be using a compensating control if your defined approach method needed that extra support. And an example of when you might need you might need a compensating control in that situation is if you have, for example, a legacy system that can't be updated and it just can't meet the modern requirements for, if it's anti-malware as the example, either through the traditional approach or the innovative new approach. So when you have that real constraint, that legacy system or some other business constraint or technical issue that prevents the requirement from being met, then that's where the compensating control can come in and help you with that.
Okay, great. So we've also seen some recent interest in questions about where PCI DSS applies. For example, does it apply to cardholder data on paper, such as receipts, reports, and does it apply to Bluetooth technology?
And the answer is yes, yes, and yes. PCI DSS applies, or it's intended to apply wherever there is payment data. It's there to protect, irrespective of what the underlying media is, or whether it's electronic or hard copy or anything like that. So from a technical perspective, that includes wireless technologies, of which Bluetooth is an example. From a physical media perspective, that might include written paper or printed paper, where that still exists, and also any physical storage media that may be holding it. And as far as the standard goes, that the requirements in those two instances are requirement 4 with respect to transmission of data, and requirement 9, which is about protection of the physical container that's holding the data, be it a paper or hard copy or some kind of digital container. So those requirements are the same in both 3.2.1 and version 4, and the answer to that question is the same for both 3.2.1 and 4. It hasn't changed with the new version of the standard, but Alicia mentioned we've had some recent queries on this, and I think that might be because we've been updating a lot of our frequently asked questions on our website. And those are two examples of frequently asked questions that you can find the answers to on our website. And what we're currently doing is going through all of the FAQs. We have at least 200, I think, that we've identified that talk about requirements in PCI DSS, that we're just going through and updating to make sure that the answer can support both version 3.2.1 and version 4. So where, for example, the requirement language may have changed in the standard, the answer to the question is still the same, but we just want to make sure that it's pointing you to the right place in the standard to find out where that's referenced. So the FAQs, you'll notice, will have more recent update dates on them on our website, and that's why a lot of them are being updated to support the version 4 direction as far as where to find the information in the standard.
So which of the PCI DSS requirements have you received the most questions about?
That's a very good question. When we did the RFCs, you may have heard we had a huge amount of feedback, and that feedback was over every requirement, every part of the standard. But when it comes to the specific requirement numbers, I think requirement 8 was one that we had a lot of feedback on. That's the requirement for authentication. topics such as multi-factor authentication, requirements for strong passwords, and requirements for authentication when it's a system account or a computer account as opposed to a user account. So there's a lot of different aspects of requirement 8. So I think that generated a lot of questions because there was a lot of hot topics in there. Requirement 6 was another one, and 11, they're common there about managing vulnerabilities. So patching processes, vulnerability scans, that kind of thing.
So Emma, besides PCI DSS version 4, what other standards updates are coming this year?
Yeah, we have been working on other standards, believe it or not. PCI DSS is not the only one. We are currently about to release 2 updates, well, one update, one brand new. Our software security framework, the Secure Software Standard, we're about to release an updated version of that. It's going to be version 1.2, and it contains a new module for requirements to support web software. So it's a web software module in the Secure Software Standard. That's just going through its final processes of getting ready for publication, so we expect to have that out in the next month or so. And then we have our new mobile standard. The abbreviation for that is MPOC. It stands for Mobile Payments on COTS. The COTS device is a commercial off-the-shelf, so the consumer phone, for example. And that is the next iteration of our SPOC and CPOC standards, and that is also due out before the end of the year. So we do have presentations this week on both of those. Jake Marcinko is going to be providing an update on the software security framework, and Andrew Jameson on the mobile standards, and they're all happening in the next couple of days. So you'll get a lot more information on those as well.
So Lance, with all of these standard changes and the PO restructure, how is the Council communicating all of these updates?
In as many ways as we possibly can. In some ways, this goes back to one of the things that was from that first question. What have we learned? And what we've learned is that our website tends to be the window, and I've used this before, into everything PCI, whether it's the standards or our programs, whether it's the supplemental information, whether it's referring to some of the FAQs that Emma was just referring to. So we looked at what we have in place, or had in place, and said, we really need to up our game. We need to make it more valuable as a tool for the industry. So as we are making these announcements, as we are introducing these new standards and this new model, we concurrently have been working on changing how we integrate that information into our website and how our website actually works. So that is probably the single biggest one, is the single most important tool for the community, our website, has gone through a massive upgrade. It's easier to use, hopefully. It's easier to find the information. It's more logical, and it's just more pleasant overall. That is the primary tool that everybody constantly refers to, but we've also introduced some new tools. And most critical of that is recognizing that the world's changed. The website is important. It is still that oracle of everything PCI that you want to have. However, people consume it differently. So we've introduced a new mobile app. And that mobile app is really designed around how people consume information. And it is around simple text and identifying those pieces of information, tagging that, and holding it. There's a lot I could go through on all of this, but honestly, I'd rather have the experts talk about it, and we have Mark and Elizabeth and Lindsay on Thursday going through and talking about the engagement practices. But really, we've rethought how we draw you in and how we present the information that you need to you, both by tools and by structure.
Okay, so we're nearly out of time, so I hope that this question and answer session has been helpful for you, and that you have learned something today. And we have lots of sessions throughout the coming days to address many of these topics, so I hope that you will join us there. And thank you so much, Lance and Emma, for all of the great information today.
Yeah. And if I can add one thing, it doesn't end here. All of us are walking around. If you see any of us and you have a question, stop us and ask us, please. That's why we're here.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.